They say the person who holds your hand when you're falling is the one who truly loves you. But what if the person who pushed you was the one who swore to protect you? I was falling. Not metaphorically, but literally hanging over the edge of the Ravenwood Bridge, staring down into the black, icy water below. My brakes were cut. My seatbelt was jammed. And the last text on my phone was from my boyfriend, Julian, saying, "Goodbye, Helen, it's just business." I thought that was the end. I closed my eyes, waiting for death. Instead, I felt a grip of steel wrap around my wrist. I looked up into the coldest, darkest eyes I'd ever seen. I didn't know it then, but the devil himself had just come to save me. The rain in Chicago didn't just fall. It hammered against the earth like it held a grudge. Helen Vance sat in the driver's seat of her beat-up 2018 Honda Civic, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. The wipers were fighting a losing battle against the deluge, slapping back and forth in a frantic rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. She checked her phone again. From Julian, 8:42 p.m. Meet me at the old shipyard. Warehouse 4. We need to talk about the accounts. Helen threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Talk about the accounts, she muttered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. She was an accountant, a good one, but for the last 6 months she had been doing nothing but cleaning up Julian Thorne's messes. Julian, with his charming smile, his tailored suits, and his endless string of bad luck investments. She had found the discrepancy 2 days ago. $50,000 missing from the firm's escrow account. When she confronted him, he had laughed it off, calling it a clerical error. But Helen knew numbers. Numbers didn't lie. People did. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. She pulled out of her apartment complex, the tires splashing through deep puddles. The city was a blur of neon lights, smeared by the rain. She needed to get to the shipyard. She needed to tell him that she was done. Done covering for him, done loving him, done being the naive girl who thought his gambling debts were just temporary setbacks. She merged onto the Ravenwood Bridge. It was a massive steel structure connecting the city proper to the industrial district. At this time of night, under a storm warning, traffic was sparse. Helen accelerated, wanting to get this over with. The speedometer climbed. 45, 50, 55. Ahead, the taillights of a semi-truck flared red. Helen instinctively tapped the brake pedal. Nothing happened. Her foot went all the way to the floor, without resistance. It felt like stepping into a void. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She pumped the pedal again, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. "Come on," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "Come on!" The truck ahead was getting closer. Fast. She checked the emergency brake, yanking the lever up with all her strength. The cables snapped with a sickening ping that she felt through the chassis. He cut them. The realization hit her faster than the oncoming collision. Julian! He didn't just make a mistake. He did this. She swerved hard to the right to avoid the truck. The car hydroplaned. The world turned into a chaotic spin of centrifugal force and screaming rubber. The Civic pirouetted across the wet asphalt, sliding uncontrollably toward the edge of the bridge. The guardrail. It was old, rusted, and definitely not designed to stop a ton of metal moving at 50 miles per hour. Crash! The sound was deafening. Metal shearing against metal, glass shattering into a million diamonds. The airbag deployed, punching Helen in the face with the force of a prizefighter, filling the cabin with white dust and the smell of gunpowder. Then, silence, followed by a terrifying groan of steel. Helen blinked, her vision swimming. There was a ringing in her ears. She tasted blood. As the dust settled, she realized the car was tilted forward at a 45-degree angle. Through the shattered windshield, she didn't see the road. She saw the churning, black water of the river 200 feet below. The car rocked. She gasped, freezing in place. The front half of the vehicle was dangling over the abyss. The only thing keeping her from plummeting was the rear axle, caught on a twisted piece of the guardrail. Her phone buzzed on the floor mat, which was now sliding toward the broken windshield. The screen lit up. From Julian, I'm sorry, Helen. The life insurance pays out double for accidental death. I really need the money. A sob broke from her chest, a raw, guttural sound of betrayal. He was going to kill her for money. The man she had cooked dinner for, the man she had loved for 3 years. The car groaned again, slipping another inch. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind howling through the broken windows. "Somebody, please." She fumbled for the door handle. It was jammed. The frame had buckled on impact. She was trapped in a metal coffin, teetering on the edge of oblivion. Suddenly, headlights washed over the wreckage from behind. A sleek, black-armored SUV screeched to a halt on the bridge, ignoring the rain and the danger. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded against the pavement, getting closer. "Don't move," a deep voice commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order carved from granite. Helen turned her head slowly, afraid that even the shift in weight would send her over. Through the rain-streaked side window, she saw him. He was tall, wearing a long, black trench coat that billowed in the storm. His hair was dark, plastered to his forehead by the rain. But it was his face that arrested her. Sharp cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that burned with a terrifying intensity. He didn't look like a paramedic. He didn't look like a cop. He looked like a predator who had just found wounded prey. Dante Moretti didn't run. He moved with a lethal purpose. He had been tailing Julian Thorne for 3 weeks. The little weasel owed the Moretti family $2 million in gambling debts. Dante, the underboss of the Chicago outfit, usually didn't handle collections himself. That was work for the low-level soldiers. But Julian had been slippery, and Dante had a feeling the man was planning to skip town. He hadn't expected Julian to try to liquidate his, quote, assets. He certainly hadn't expected the asset to be a woman. Dante had watched from a distance as Julian tampered with the Honda Civic outside the apartment complex. He had been too far away to stop it then, and by the time he realized what was happening, the girl was already driving toward the bridge. Now, he stood on the edge of the precipice, looking at the car dangling like a pendulum. "Listen to me," Dante roared over the wind, stepping onto the wet beam of the broken guardrail. "The car is slipping. You need to climb out the window, now." Helen looked at him, her blue eyes wide with terror. Blood trickled down her temple, staining her pale skin. I can't. My leg is stuck." Dante cursed under his breath in Italian. Casso. He assessed the situation. The rear bumper was hooked on a jagged piece of rebar. It was giving way. He had maybe 30 seconds before gravity won. He didn't hesitate. Dante lunged forward, grabbing the frame of the car to stabilize it. The metal groaned under his weight. "I'm going to pull the door open," Dante shouted. "When I do, you have to push. You understand?" Helen nodded, tears mixing with the blood on her face. Okay. Dante planted his feet. He was a man of immense physical power, honed by years of combat and gym discipline, but this was physics against flesh. He gripped the mangled door handle, his muscles strained, the veins in his neck bulging as he roared, pulling with everything he had. Screech! The metal yielded. The door popped open, swinging out over the nothingness below. The shift in weight was catastrophic. The car lurched forward. The rear bumper snapped free from the rebar. "Jump!" Dante screamed. Helen tried to lunge, but the car fell. It tipped past the point of no return, diving nose first toward the river. She screamed as the floor dropped out from under her. She slid out of the open door, falling into the open air, but she didn't hit the water. A hand, rough, scarred, and impossibly strong, snatched her wrist in mid-air. The jolt nearly dislocated her shoulder. Helen gasped, swinging wildly over the abyss. She looked up. Dante was lying flat on his stomach on the wet asphalt, his body half hanging off the bridge. His hand was clamped around her wrist like a vice. His teeth were gritted, his face flushed with exertion. "I've got you," he growled. "I've got you, Helen." She was shocked he knew her name, but the fear of falling was greater than her curiosity. She looked down at her feet, dangling hundreds of feet above the black water. "Don't let go," she sobbed. "Please, don't let go." "I never let go of what's mine," Dante said. The words were strange, possessive, but in that moment, they were the only anchor she had. He began to pull. It was an impossible feat of strength. She was dead weight, wet and terrified, hanging vertically. But Dante Moretti didn't know the meaning of failure. Inch by inch, he hauled her up. "Grab the ledge," he commanded. Helen reached up with her free hand, her fingers scraping against the rough concrete of the bridge deck. She found a purchase. With one final heave, Dante yanked her up and over the edge. She collapsed onto the wet road, gasping for air, her body shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Before she could process that she was alive, she heard the splash. Far below, her car hit the water and vanished. She lay there in the rain, staring at the sky. A shadow blocked out the streetlights. Dante was kneeling over her. He took off his heavy trench coat and draped it over her shivering body. It smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and gunpowder. Did you see him?" Helen whispered, her voice raspy. "Julian?" Dante's expression darkened. He reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man who looked like he could kill with his bare hands. "Julian is a dead man walking," Dante said softly. "But tonight, you're not Helen Vance, the accountant." Helen frowned, confusion clouding her mind as adrenaline faded into shock. "What?" Dante scooped her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He began walking toward his armored SUV. "Tonight," he whispered, "you died on this bridge. That's what the world needs to believe. That's what Julian needs to believe." "Why?" she mumbled, her eyes drooping. The darkness was creeping in now, a safety mechanism for her traumatized brain. "Because," Dante said, placing her into the heated leather passenger seat of his car, "if he thinks you're dead, he'll get careless. And when he gets careless, I'm going to destroy him. And you," he paused, leaning in close, his lips inches from her ear, "you are going to help me checkmate him." Helen tried to ask another question, but the warmth of the car and the scent of him overwhelmed her. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped against the seat. Dante shut the door, enclosing her in his world. He walked around to the driver's side, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. "It's done," Dante said into the phone. "The car is in the river. No body will be found. Clean up the bridge. Make it look like a fatal accident." He paused, watching Helen sleep. "And find Julian Thorne. Don't touch him yet. Just watch him. I want to see him celebrate. I want to see him think he won." Dante hung up and revved the engine. The powerful SUV roared, turning away from the wreckage, carrying the dead girl back to life. Helen woke up to the smell of espresso and the feeling of silk against her skin. She shot up in bed, gasping. For a fleeting second, she expected to see the dashboard of her car, the rain, the bridge. Instead, she was in a room larger than her entire apartment. The walls were adorned with dark mahogany paneling, and floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a sprawling estate covered in a blanket of morning mist. She looked down. She was wearing a silk pajama set she didn't own. Her injuries, a cut on her forehead and bruises on her arms, had been carefully bandaged. "You're awake." Helen spun around. Dante Moretti was sitting in a velvet armchair in the corner of the room, reading a newspaper. He wore a crisp, white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing intricate tattoos of vines and thorns wrapping around his forearms. He looked dangerous, even while doing something as mundane as drinking coffee. "Where am I?" Helen asked, pulling the duvet up to her chin. "Who are you?" "I'm Dante Moretti," he said, folding the newspaper. "And you are in my home, the safest place in Chicago, assuming you don't try to leave." Helen's memories came rushing back. The cut breaks, the bridge, the hand that caught her. "Julian," She choked out, "I need to call the police. He tried to kill me." Dante stood up and walked to the bedside table. He picked up a remote control and pointed it at the large, flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. "The police won't help you, Helen, because as far as the police are concerned, you're already dead." He turned on the TV. It was tuned to a local news channel. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Tragedy at Ravenwood. Local accountant presumed dead after car plunges into river." The screen showed footage of rescue boats circling the spot where her car had gone down. Then, the camera cut to a press conference. Helen stopped breathing. Standing at the podium, looking devastatingly handsome in a black suit, was Julian. He was wiping a tear from his eye. She was the light of my life," Julian said into the microphones, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "She had been struggling with depression lately. I tried to help her, but I never thought she would do this to herself." "He's lying," Helen screamed at the screen. "I didn't commit suicide. He cut the brakes." Dante turned the TV off. The room fell into a heavy silence. "He's spinning the narrative," Dante said calmly. "Suicide means no investigation into the car. No investigation means no one finds the cut brake lines on the wreck I had my men recover and hide." Dante walked closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "But it gets worse, Helen." He tossed a manila folder onto the bed. "Julian didn't just kill you for the insurance money, he needed a scapegoat." Helen opened the folder with trembling hands. It was a forensic audit of Julian's company. Her eyes scanned the numbers, her accountant brain taking over. Unauthorized transfers, shell companies, embezzlement, and at the bottom of every fraudulent document was a signature. Her signature. "He forged my name," she whispered, horror dawning on her. "He stole $5 million from his investors," Dante explained, "including $2 million from my family. He set it up so that when the theft was discovered, you would be the one to take the fall. Your suicide wraps it all up in a neat little bow. The guilty accountant killed herself out of guilt, and Julian plays the grieving victim while keeping the money." Helen felt like she was going to be sick. The man she had loved, the man she had planned a future with, hadn't just murdered her. He had destroyed her name, her reputation, and her memory. She slumped back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "My life is over. I can't go back. If I show up alive, I go to prison for embezzlement." "Correct," Dante said. He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Helen Vance is dead. She died in that river." He reached out, his rough thumb wiping a tear from her cheek. The gesture was possessive, electric. "But you are still here, and you have something I want." Helen looked up at him, sniffing. "What could I possibly have that a Mafia boss wants?" "You're the only person who knows Julian's books better than he does," Dante said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I want my money back, and I want to punish the man who stole it." He stood up and extended his hand, the same hand that had saved her on the bridge. "I'm offering you a deal. You become someone else. You live under my protection. You use that brilliant mind of yours to help me bankrupt Julian Thorne and destroy everything he loves. And when we are done, you get to deliver the final blow." Helen looked at his hand. It was a deal with the devil. She knew that. Dante Moretti was a criminal, a killer, but he was the only truth in a world of lies. She thought of Julian's fake tears on the news. She thought of the suicide legacy he had forced upon her. A fire ignited in her chest, burning away the sadness. She took Dante's hand. "I don't just want him bankrupt," she said, her voice steady for the first time. "I want him to suffer." Dante's smile widened, showing a glimpse of white teeth. "Good girl." The next 3 weeks were a blur of transformation. Dante's estate wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Helen was given a new room in the East Wing, far away from the prying eyes of the staff, except for Sophia, an elderly Italian maid who served as her warden and caretaker. Dante was true to his word. He didn't touch her, but he was always there. He watched her eat. He watched her read. He watched her work. Helen spent her days in Dante's private library, surrounded by servers and laptops. She wasn't just looking for the missing money anymore. She was hunting. She traced Julian's digital footprint. She found the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She found the shell companies registered under fake names. She realized Julian wasn't just a thief. He was sloppy. He thought he was a genius, but he left breadcrumbs everywhere. "He's moving the money next Friday," Helen said one evening. She was sitting on the floor of the library, surrounded by papers. Dante was standing by the fireplace, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Where?" Dante asked. "The Celestial Charity Gala," Helen said, holding up a printout. "It's the biggest social event of the season. Julian is on the board. He's using the charity's auction to launder the stolen $5 million. He's going to buy a piece of art from an anonymous seller himself to clean the cash." Dante took a sip of his drink, his eyes gleaming. The Celestial Gala. That's black tie. High security. Invitation only. "I know," Helen said. "He'll be there, with his new girlfriend." She had found that too. Julian hadn't waited long. He was already seen around town with Veronica St. Clair, a heiress to a shipping fortune. It stung, but the pain was duller now, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. "So," Dante said, setting his glass down, "we crashed the party." Helen looked down at her simple sweatpants. "I can't go. People know me. Julian knows me." "Helen Vance was a mouse," Dante said, walking toward her. He offered a hand to pull her up from the floor. She wore cardigans and glasses and apologized for taking up space. "You're not her anymore." He snapped his fingers. The library doors opened. A team of people walked in. A stylist, a hairdresser, a makeup artist. "You have 4 hours," Dante commanded the team. "Make her unrecognizable. Make her a queen." 4 hours later, Helen stood in front of a full-length mirror. She gasped. The woman staring back was a stranger. Her honey-blonde hair had been dyed a rich, dark chocolate brown and cut into a sharp, angular bob that framed her jaw. The glasses were gone, replaced by green contact lenses that changed her entire gaze. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was made of liquid midnight. It was a backless, deep crimson gown that hugged every curve of her body, with a slit that went up to her thigh. It was bold. It was dangerous. She wore diamond earrings that dangled to her neck, and a necklace that cost more than her old apartment. "Perfection," a voice said from the doorway. Helen turned. Dante was standing there, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He looked devastating. He walked over to her, his eyes scanning her body with an appreciation that made her breath hitch. "Who am I tonight?" she asked. "Tonight," Dante said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. "You are Elena Rossi, my fiancée. You are the daughter of an Italian steel magnate. You speak little English. You are arrogant, and you are untouchable." He opened the box. Inside was a massive ruby ring. He took her left hand. "This is strictly for the cover," he murmured, sliding the ring onto her finger. It felt heavy, cold. "Strictly for the cover," Helen repeated, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Dante didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her slightly closer, his scent of sandalwood and leather enveloping her. "Julian will be there," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "He will look at you. He might even recognize something in your walk. But he won't believe it, because ghosts don't walk into ballrooms on the arm of the devil." He offered her his arm. "Are you ready to play the game, Elena?" Helen looked at the mirror one last time. The sad, broken girl on the bridge was gone. In her place was a woman who held the hand of a Mafia boss. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's go take his king." They walked out to the waiting limousine. As they drove toward the city lights, toward the man who tried to kill her, Helen felt a strange sensation. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the victim. She was the weapon. And Dante Moretti was the one aiming her. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a kaleidoscope of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers, and the hollow laughter of Chicago's elite. It was a world Helen knew from the edges, handling the invoices for these parties, but never from the center, until tonight. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the room didn't just quiet down. It froze. Dante Moretti entered like a king, claiming his throne. He walked with a predatory grace, his tuxedo sharp against his broad shoulders, but it was the woman on his arm who stole the oxygen from the room. Helen kept her chin high, her expression bored and haughty, just as Dante had instructed. The red dress flowed around her like liquid fire, the slit revealing a scandalously high glimpse of her leg with every step. Her dark hair and green contacts made her look exotic, dangerous. "They are staring," Helen murmured, her lips barely moving. Her heart was beating so hard she felt it might crack a rib. "Let them," Dante replied, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her arm. "They stare because they are afraid. They know I don't belong here, and they are terrified that I've brought a queen who does." He guided her through the crowd. The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted for them. Dante's reputation preceded him. The Moretti family was whispered about in fear, not polite conversation. "There he is," Dante whispered. Helen's breath hitched. Standing near the ice sculpture was Julian. He looked exactly the same as the night he killed her. Handsome, charming. He was holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something a tall, blonde woman was saying. That must be Veronica St. Clair. Seeing him alive, happy and wealthy, spending the money he stole from her firm, the money he killed her for, ignited a cold fury in Helen's gut. The fear vanished. In its place was a desire for blood. "He's coming over," Helen said, tightening her grip on Dante's arm. "Remember," Dante said, his hand covering hers, "you are Elena. You don't know him. You are above him." Julian had spotted Dante. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, fear, before he masked it with professional politeness. He walked over, Veronica trailing behind him like a trophy. "Mr. Moretti," Julian said, extending a hand. "I didn't expect to see you at a charity gala for orphans, was it?" Dante didn't take the hand. He looked at it as if it were covered in filth. "I have a sudden interest in philanthropy, Thorne, and where my money goes." Julian pulled his hand back, clearing his throat awkwardly. His eyes shifted to Helen. The moment his gaze landed on her, he froze. His pupils dilated. The color drained from his face. He stared at her, searching, dissecting. "And who is this?" Julian asked, his voice shaking slightly. "This is my fiancé," Dante said smoothly, pulling Helen flush against his side. "Elena Rossi." Helen looked at Julian with dead eyes. She tilted her head, inspecting him like he was a bug on a windshield. "Piacere," she said, her voice dropping an octave, thick, with a bored Italian accent. "Your tie is crooked." Julian blinked, stumbling back a step. I'm sorry. You remind me of someone." "I get that often," Helen said in English, keeping the accent heavy. "I have a very common face, yes?" "No," Julian whispered, unable to look away. "Not common. Dead." "Excuse me?" Dante stepped forward, his body shielding Helen, his voice turning into a growl. "Are you insulting my future wife, Thorne?" No, of course not," Julian stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "My apologies. I lost someone recently. The resemblance is just haunting." Veronica stepped in, sensing the tension. She looked Helen up and down with jealousy. "Julian, darling, the auction is starting. We should go." Julian nodded, but his eyes were still glued to Helen. He looked at her neck, her hands. Helen knew what he was looking for. A small scar on her collarbone from a childhood bike accident. She had covered it with heavy makeup. "A pleasure, Miss Rossi," Julian said, his voice hollow. Helen didn't smile. She just raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" As Julian and Veronica walked away, Helen felt her knees go weak. She leaned into Dante. "He knows," she whispered. "He suspects." "Suspecting isn't knowing," Dante said, guiding her toward the auction seating. "He's seeing a ghost. It will make him irrational. It will make him sloppy." Dante pulled out a chair for her at the front table, right across from Julian. "Now," Dante whispered against her neck, sending shivers down her spine. "Let's take everything he has." The auctioneer, a man with a British accent and a gavel that looked like a weapon, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the highlight of the evening." Helen scanned the catalog. She knew Julian's plan perfectly. Item number 42. The Weeping Angel, a modernist painting by a reclusive artist. It was valued at $2 million. Julian had arranged for a shell company to put it up for auction, and he planned to buy it for $5 million, using the stolen funds. It was a classic money laundering scheme. Overpay for an asset to legitimize dirty cash. If he won the painting, the stolen money became legitimate charity revenue, which he could then funnel back to himself through administrative fees. Item 42, the auctioneer announced. Bidding starts at $1 million. Julian raised his paddle instantly. $1 million, the auctioneer called. 1.5, a random bidder at the back called out. $2 million, Julian countered aggressively. He wanted to scare everyone off. The room went silent. $2 million was already the market value. No one else was going to bid. Julian smiled, relaxing in his chair. He loosened his tie. He thought he had won. Dante didn't move. He was checking his watch. "Wait," Helen whispered. "Let him think he's safe." "Going once," the auctioneer said. "Going twice." Dante raised a single finger. $3 million. The room gasped. Heads turned. Julian's head snapped around so fast, his neck cracked. He stared at Dante with open hostility. Julian needed to win this. If he didn't spend the $5 million tonight, the auditors coming next week would find the cash sitting in the wrong account. He had to move it. 3.5? Julian called out, his voice tight. Dante didn't even look at him. He looked at Helen, picking up her hand and kissing her knuckles. $4 million, Dante said casually, as if ordering a coffee. Julian turned red. 4.5, he shouted. $5 million, Dante returned instantly. Julian stood up halfway. $5 million was the exact amount he had stolen. If he bid more, he would be dipping into his own personal savings, money he didn't have liquid. He glared at Dante. Why was the mob boss bidding on a painting? Was it just to spite him? Julian looked at Helen. She was whispering something in Dante's ear, laughing softly. The sight of her, so like Helen, yet so untouchable, broke his concentration. He felt like he was in a nightmare. $5.5 million, Julian screamed. The room buzzed. He was overpaying massively. Helen squeezed Dante's hand. This was the moment. He's tapped out, she whispered. He has about $600,000 in his personal accounts. Anything over $6 million bankrupts him personally. Dante smirked. He raised his paddle one last time. $6 million! Julian looked like he was going to have a stroke. Veins bulged in his forehead. Veronica was tugging on his sleeve, whispering for him to stop. But Julian was a narcissist. He couldn't lose. Not to Dante. Not in front of the ghost of his dead girlfriend. $6,500,000! Julian roared. Silence. Absolute deafening silence. The auctioneer looked at Dante. Sir? Counterbid? Dante slowly lowered his paddle. He turned to Julian, locked eyes with him, and smiled. A cold, cruel smile. 2. Rich for my blood, Dante said clearly. It's all yours, Thorn. Sold! To Mr. Julian Thorne for $6.5 million. The auctioneer slammed the gavel. Applause broke out. But Julian didn't look like a winner. He sank into his chair, pale as a sheet. He had just committed to paying $1.5 million more than the stolen funds he had. He would have to liquidate everything, his condo, his car, his stocks, just to cover the check he had to write tonight. You ruined him, Helen whispered, a thrill running through her veins. He's insolvent. Not yet, Dante said. The kill isn't finished. The music started. A waltz. Dance with me, Dante commanded. He stood up and pulled her onto the floor. They moved together in perfect sync. Helen had never danced like this, but Dante led her with an authority that made it easy to follow. His hand was warm on the small of her back. You did well, he said, his face inches from hers. I hated him, Helen confessed, looking over Dante's shoulder at Julian, who was frantically making calls on his cell phone in the corner. But seeing him panic, it felt good. Revenge is a potent drug, Dante murmured. His dark eyes searched hers. But be careful, Helen. Don't lose yourself in the role. I'm not acting anymore, she whispered, looking up at him. The chemistry between them was undeniable now. It wasn't just gratitude for saving her life. It was the way he looked at her, like she was the only dangerous thing in the room he respected. Dante, she breathed. He pulled her closer, breaking propriety. Tell me you want this. Tell me you want to burn his world down. I want it all gone, she vowed. I want him to have nothing. Then watch, Dante said. He spun her around so she was facing the exit. Police officers were walking into the ballroom, not just beat cops. Detectives. FBI. The music stopped. The chatter died. The officers walked straight to Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne? The lead detective boomed. Julian dropped his phone. Yes? What is the meaning of this? We received an anonymous tip regarding the brake lines of a 2018 Honda Civic found in the river this morning. The detective said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. And we have digital evidence linking you to the sabotage. The room gasped. Veronica St. Clair backed away from Julian as if he were radioactive. That's a lie. Julian shrieked. She killed herself. It was suicide. We also have the forensic accounting logs, the detective continued, holding up a flash drive, sent to us 10 minutes ago. Evidence of $5 million embezzled. Julian looked around wildly. His eyes landed on Dante and Helen. Dante was standing still, a monolith of judgment. Helen stepped forward, just a half step. She let the Elena facade drop. She let her posture shift back to the girl Julian knew. She lifted her hand and gave him a small, sad wave. Julian's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He mouthed the word, Helen? You have the right to remain silent, the officer said, snapping handcuffs onto Julian's wrists. As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming, shouting about ghosts and Mafia setups, the elite of Chicago watched in shock. Dante leaned down to Helen's ear. Checkmate. Helen watched Julian disappear out the doors. It was over. The man who tried to kill her was gone. Ideally, this should be the end of the story. She should thank Dante and leave. But as she turned to look at the Mafia boss who had orchestrated it all, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to leave. And looking at the fire in Dante's eyes, she knew he wasn't going to let her. The ride back from the St. Regis Hotel was suffocatingly quiet. The adrenaline that had fueled Helen through the auction and the arrest was fading, replaced by a hollow ache in her chest. She looked out the tinted window at the Chicago skyline. The rain had started again, tracing familiar paths down the glass. Julian was gone. The police had him. The evidence was irrefutable. Her old life, the loans, the betrayal, the fear, was over. You're quiet. Dante's voice broke the silence. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning the dark highway behind them. It's over, Helen whispered. She looked down at the massive ruby ring on her finger. I suppose I should give this back. She started to slide the ring off, but Dante reached over and covered her hand. His grip was warm, firm, and stopping her completely. "Keep it, Dante," she said, turning to face him. "The deal is done. You got your money back. Or at least, you stopped Julian from spending it. I got my revenge. I should go." "Go where?" Dante asked, his voice hardening. "Back to an apartment that doesn't exist? To a job where everyone thinks you're dead? You are a ghost, Helen. Ghosts have nowhere to go." "I can start over," she argued, though her heart wasn't in it. "Move to another state. Change my name for real." "Is that what you want?" Dante asked. He signaled the driver to exit the highway, taking a shortcut through the industrial district, the same district where she had nearly died. "You want to run away and be a nobody again? After tonight?" Helen opened her mouth to answer, but the answer died in her throat. She didn't want to be a nobody. Tonight, standing beside Dante, destroying a man who had hurt her, she had felt powerful. She had felt alive in a way she never had filing tax returns. Suddenly, the driver shouted, "Boss! Ambush!" The limousine swerved violently. A black SUV had T-boned them from the side street, spinning the limo across the wet asphalt. Glass shattered. The world turned upside down. Helen screamed as the car slammed into a concrete pillar. The airbags deployed with a deafening bang. Disoriented, coughing in the dust, Helen felt a hand on her arm. "Helen! Are you hurt?" Dante's voice was urgent, fierce. He was already moving, checking her for injuries. Blood was trickling down his forehead, but he didn't seem to notice. I think I'm okay," she gasped. "Stay down," Dante commanded. He kicked the damaged door open. He pulled a handgun from a holster beneath his tuxedo jacket, a weapon she hadn't even known he was carrying. Gunfire erupted outside. Bullets pinged against the armored plating of the limo. "Volkov!" Dante growled. "The Russians. They knew I'd be distracted tonight." He turned to her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that stopped her heart. "Stay in the car. Do not move." Dante rolled out of the vehicle, returning fire. The noise was deafening. Helen huddled on the floor of the limo, her hands over her ears. She could hear Dante shouting orders to his driver, who was firing from the front seat. But then she saw it. Through the shattered partition, she saw a shadow moving on the other side of the pillar. A gunman was flanking Dante, moving to his blind spot. Dante was focused on the SUV in front of him. He didn't see the man coming up behind. Helen didn't think. She didn't analyze the risk. She saw the gun on the floor, the driver's backup weapon that had slid back during the crash. She grabbed it. It was heavy, cold steel. She scrambled out of the broken door into the rain. "Dante, behind you!" she screamed. Dante spun around, but he was a split second too slow. The Russian gunman raised his rifle. Helen raised the pistol. She didn't have training. She didn't have practice. She just had the instinct to protect the man who had saved her. She pulled the trigger. The gun kicked back hard, hurting her wrist. The shot went wide, hitting the concrete pillar next to the gunman's head. But it was enough. The gunman flinched, ducking for cover. That split-second distraction gave Dante the opening he needed. Bang, bang. Dante put 2 rounds into the attacker's chest. The man dropped. Silence fell over the alley. The other attackers in the SUV, seeing their flank failed and their leader down, peeled out and sped away into the night. Dante stood there in the rain, his tuxedo ruined, chest heaving. He slowly turned to look at Helen. She was standing 10 feet away, shaking, holding the smoking gun with 2 hands. Her red dress was torn, her hair plastered to her face. He walked toward her. He didn't look angry, he looked in awe. He gently took the gun from her hands and tucked it into his waistband. Then he grabbed her face with both hands. "You could have been killed," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "He was going to shoot you." Helen stammered, the shock setting in. I couldn't let you go." Dante stared at her, the rain washing the blood from his brow. "You said you wanted to leave," he said intensely. "You said you wanted to start over." I was wrong, Helen breathed. She looked at the bodies, the car, the danger. Then she looked at him. I don't want to be safe, Dante. I want to be with you. Dante didn't wait. He crushed his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was a promise of violence and devotion. He kissed her like she was the air he needed to breathe. Then you never leave, he growled against her lips. You are mine, Helen. From the bridge to the grave. You are mine. And you're mine? She whispered back. 6 months later, the chill of winter had settled over Chicago, but inside the Moretti estate, a fire was roaring. Helen sat at the massive oak desk in Dante's study, their study now. She was reviewing the ledger for the shipping operations. Since she had taken over the finances, profits were up 30%. No one dared to skim off the top anymore. Not when they knew the boss's wife was an accountant who could trace a penny through a hurricane. The door opened. Dante walked in, brushing snow off his heavy wool coat. He looked tired, but when his eyes landed on her, his expression softened instantly. You're working late, Signora, he said, walking over to kiss the top of her head. Someone has to keep this empire running while you're out scaring the city council, Helen teased, leaning back into his touch. Dante pulled a chair up next to her. He took her hand, the left one. The ruby ring was still there, but now it was joined by a thick band of diamonds and platinum. A wedding ring. They hadn't had a big ceremony. Just a private service in the estate chapel, attended by the inner circle. Helen Vance was legally dead. Elena Moretti was very much alive. I have news, Dante said, his face serious. About Julian? The trial ended today, Dante said. Guilty on all counts. Embezzlement, fraud, attempted murder. He got 25 years. He'll die in prison. Helen nodded slowly. She expected to feel a surge of triumph, but instead, she just felt peace. Julian was a memory, a scar that had healed. He asked about you, Dante added quietly. His lawyer said he kept screaming that he saw you, that you were haunting him. Helen smiled, a cold, sharp smile that she had learned from her husband. Let him think that. Let him spend every night in that cell wondering if I'm a ghost or a woman. Dante chuckled, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. You are no ghost, Helen. You are the most dangerous woman in this city. He stood up and pulled her to her feet. Come, put the books away. Where are we going? She asked. To the bridge, Dante said. Helen froze. She hadn't been back there since that night. Why? Because, Dante said, pulling her close, I want to remember where I found you, and I want you to remember that you didn't fall. You rose. An hour later, they stood on the Ravenwood Bridge. The guardrail had been repaired. The rain was falling again, just like that night. But this time, Helen wasn't alone. She wasn't driving a broken car. She was standing wrapped in the arms of the King of Chicago, wearing a coat that cost more than Julian's life was worth. She looked down at the black water. It didn't look scary anymore. It just looked like a reflection. I love you, Dante whispered into the wind, his arms tightening around her waist. Helen turned in his arms. She reached up and touched his face, the face of the monster who had saved her. I love you, Dante. He kissed her, there on the edge of the abyss. Her ex had pushed her off this bridge to kill her. But the fall didn't kill her. It just pushed her into the arms of the only man strong enough to catch her. And true to his word, Dante Moretti never let go. And that is the story of how a betrayal led to a love more dangerous than death. Helen thought her life was over when she went over that bridge, but sometimes you have to fall to find the person who will catch you. What did you think of Helen's transformation? Did Julian get what he deserved, or should Dante have handled him? Personally, let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and twists, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a terrifying werewolf romance coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the villain in one story is the hero in yours. See you next time.